I wonder what it was like to be a kid in Tigard in the olden days. In this video, we are going to hear some stories from kids who grew up right here in Tigard. The first story is about this very outhouse. An outhouse is an outside toilet. This one sits at a museum right here in Tigard called John Tigard House. But it used to be up on Bull Mountain at the Spazda Dairy Farm. Now, when this outhouse was up on Bull Mountain at that dairy farm, the family that owned it had several children. One of them was a little girl who did not like to do chores. So that little girl used to hide in this very outhouse so that she could avoid doing her chores. They also had a little boy. The Spazda's little boy had a chore of scaring birds away from the garden, very much like this garden behind me here. So one day, the little girl was hiding in the outhouse, avoiding her chores, and her brother came out with a gun to scare away the pigeons that were eating the seeds in their garden. Now, he was supposed to aim up at the sky and just scare those pigeons away, but he didn't really pay attention to where he was aiming, and that boy shot a hole right through this outhouse while his sister was inside. Luckily, she was okay, but you can still see that bullet hole today.
Around 1900, life in Tigardville was very different than it is today. The community was slowly changing from a heavily forested area to a large farming community. Bull Mountain was a wonderful place to ride horses, and Fano Creek a perfect place for a swim. Marvin Gardy, son of John Gardy the blacksmith, used to fish in Fano Creek, using a bent pin and a hazelwood fishing pole. Curtis Tigard, son of Charles Tigard, was handy at catching crawdads, which look like little lobsters, for supper. Curtis and Marvin were fast chums, frequently playing together in the hayloft in the Gardy's barn. There weren't many places to go or things to do in Tigardville, so when a special event happened, it was a big deal. When the students put on a play at school, the whole community would come and watch and then have a potluck dinner afterwards. Another community event was baseball. Charles Tigard's oldest son, Will, played on this Tigardville team against other local groups. People from the community would come and watch the games for a fun afternoon. One of the biggest events each year was the 4th of July. The whole community would drive their carriages and wagons to the Grange, which is a place for farmers to gather and meet. During the celebration, a large band played. People from the community played instruments in the band. Charles Tigard, the general store owner, played a drum. Dr. Vincent played a brass horn. Kids carried American flags and marched to the music. Charles always gave a patriotic talk, and then the games and races began. Grace Tigard, Charles's daughter, remembers participating in nail driving contests. She tried to show that she could pound a nail with a hammer faster than anyone else. There was little money for extras, so children in the community found ways to make fun out of the things around them. Couldn't afford chewing gum? No problem. The children would pull sap off of pine trees and chew it. This was called pine flat chew. Didn't have any toys? Again, not an issue. Sticks, rocks, and moss could be turned into any number of playthings. 2 old buckets and some rope could be turned into stilts. A hunk of wood could be whittled into a doll, animal, or other toy. Children spent most of their free time outdoors, wandering the woods with their playmates, exploring nature, and imagining a host of games. Glenn Carrier remembers getting all dressed up and sitting with her siblings next to a main road. They would watch all day and see no more than 5 vehicles pass by. There just wasn't much traffic at all back then. Other activities included fishing and swimming in local creeks and rivers. Here you see Dr. Sylvester Vincent fishing on the Tualatin River. One passerby the Carrier children might have waited for is Mr. Keller. Mr. Keller owned a butcher shop in the town of Fulton. Since Tigard did not have a butcher and you couldn't buy fresh meat at any other type of store, Mr. Keller would drive through town once a week and sell fresh meat to Tigard families. Somewhat like today's ice cream truck, children often saved their pennies to buy a hunk of bologna from Mr. Keller as he drove by. Life wasn't all playtime for the children in the area, however. Children were needed to help support their family. Boys helped farm the land, mend equipment, and care for the animals. Girls cooked, cleaned, sewed, and helped care for younger brothers and sisters. Children were frequently so busy helping at home that they couldn't go to school. School in the late 1800s was very different than it is today. Wilson Tigard and other community members built the first school in 1853. That first school was a one-room log building similar to this one. The men cut down and trimmed the branches off of trees, then used a hand axe to cut notches at the ends so that the logs would fit together. There was no money for nails, so the men made homemade wooden pegs and fit them into hand-drilled holes. The original school was called Bend School. In 1869, the original log building was replaced by a wood frame structure on Beef Bend Road. At that time, Beef Bend Road was just a gravel path. Children walked to school through the woods, making sure to keep a lookout for bears on the way. However, in 1906, this second school caught fire. Curtis Tigard, then a fourth grader, saw the smoke and with a friend ran into the building. The boys started throwing books out of the second-story window, trying to save what they could. Adults made them leave down the fire escape. While the new school was being built, the kids continued learning in several shacks that were quickly constructed. The new school was a larger wood frame structure which was built where Value Village currently stands behind McDonald's restaurant. The new school was named East Butte School. By the end of the 1800s, the East Butte School had 85 students and 1 teacher. When the older students finished their work, they were often asked to help teach the younger students. Small communities like East Butte couldn't afford to pay a teacher much. So the community would offer to provide the teacher with a place to stay and food to eat, in addition to $20 or $30 a month. The teacher, whose home was actually in Portland, would walk out from Portland on Monday and stay at a family's home all week. Then they walked back to Portland on Friday after school. Each family would take turns hosting the teacher for a week during the school term. One of the first teachers in Tigard, Miss Post, knew how to connect with kids and make school fun. Twice a year they would have a cleanup day, where the kids cleaned up the area surrounding the school. They would gather all of the branches that had fallen off of trees and make a bonfire. Then they would roast marshmallows around the fire. Miss Post also loved to go sledding with the kids. If snow fell during the school day, they would take a break from lessons and go sledding on the hill right next to the school. Miss Post loved to slide right along with her students. School would run for 3 to 6 months each year, mostly during the winter. The rest of the year, children were needed at home to work on the family farm. During those cold winter school days, the students used a pot-bellied stove to keep warm. Those who sat closest to the stove would get roasting hot, while those who sat farthest away would be freezing cold. Ella Brant Bauer was born in Tigardville in 1888 and remembered attending school there. She said,
"When the school bell rang, we all had to stand in line according to the way we sat and marched with the drummer by left, right, left, until we got to our seat and all sat down at the same time. Next was roll call, and then we had to study. Sometimes we would get our orders for the day. If we whispered, we had to stand in the corner for 1/2 hour and face the wall and study. Discipline was better than we have nowadays. I never had to stand in the corner.
Although Ella never had to stand in the corner, she did get into mischief one day. Ella loved to write silly poems. One day she wrote a funny one about her friend Millie Leedy. She called the poem Mooly Cow. The principal, Mr. William Kester, saw Millie laughing and asked to see what she was reading. After reading the poem, he asked to keep it as a keepsake and walked away laughing. Another student at Ben's school was Glenora Spouster Carrier. She remembered how everything was set up.
We had the usual things you have on school grounds. We had teeter-totters and swings and slides, and the outhouses were out back, kind of on the edge of the woods. I think some of the children were frightened about having to go there, but we always seemed to manage. And there was a woodshed, because we had to have a fire started in the big old wood stove. And one of the neighbor boys was the fellow who always came every morning and started the fire.
At recess, the boys used wood from the forest to build a playhouse. The girls brought in moss to cover the floor and make seats. The children would eat their lunch in the playhouse and then play in there during recess. After school, the children would walk or ride a horse home. When Clara McDonald was little, it was hard for her short legs to walk all the way to school and back each day, so her dad bought her a pony. Clara rode that little pony to and from school each day. When she arrived at school, she would tie the pony up in a place where it could happily eat grass all day long. One day, Clara was rushing and didn't pay attention to the knot she was tying. While Clara was in school, the knot came loose and the pony wandered off. When Clara came out at the end of the day, the pony was gone. Clara had to walk all the way home. Luckily, the pony later showed up at her house. While growing up in Tigard may be different in many ways, some things will never change. Kids still love to hang out with family and friends, go to parties, play sports, and avoid doing chores. Schools still teach kids to read and do math, and parents still help their kids. Tigard will always be a great place to grow up.